Hello, this is again Dr. Jonathan Bentovish, and I'm recording another video presentation following this God's Physics new book by iuniverse.com, which was written for the general public regarding the new scientific paradigm and the scientific revolution that's taking place in 21st century theoretical physics and science more generally. This presentation is very unique. The title is God's Physics Hanukkah Celebration. Miracles Can Happen. And so I'm recording this on the fifth light of Hanukkah for the Jewish people and for the whole world. And as I said, there's been over 50 or 50 to 60 peer-reviewed scientific articles published about this new paradigm, new accepted scientific paradigm for the 21st century. And that new paradigm is God's physics. It's previously been called the Computational unified field theory. And today is a very special date and recording because the fifth light or day of Hanukkah celebrates a great, the whole Hanukkah celebrates a miracle for the Jewish people, signifies that even a small light can disperse or eliminate the whole darkness. It's very symbolic in the Jewish people lives and in the whole world. And the title of today's talk is Miracles Can Happen, or God's Physics Hanukkah Celebration. Miracles can happen. And in fact, one of the 60 peer-reviewed articles that haven't published, some of them are in press right now. The title was God's Physics Miracles Can Happen. And so in order to, and it's very relevant obviously for Hanukkah, because Hanukkah is a time of a significant miracle for the Jewish people, and it also signifies in more depth the power of faith and the existence of this singular higher ordered, in God's physics terms we call it universal consciousness reality, in religious terms we call it God, but it's a special time. And so I want to focus today in order to explain how God's physics new 21st century scientific or theoretical physics paradigm allows for miracles to happen, or miracles can happen. I want to explain briefly some of the things that I touched upon in previous presentations. I don't want to make it a lengthy presentation, so just highlighting. We said that science is shifting from the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, relativity theory about the macroscopic universe, quantum mechanics about the microscopic realm. And we said that, and those were of 20th century physics. Einstein discovered relativity theory singularly. He started to discover quantum mechanics, and with other scientists, it became the full quantum mechanics. And we said that there was a contradiction between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, which is not a possible situation for science for long. There is a basic problem of the old material causal paradigm not being able to explain where 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe exists. They call it dark matter, dark energy, or they're hypothesized to comprise dark matter, dark energy, but yet they account for 95%, up to 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe, which is an impossible situation for science to remain in. And in fact, as I mentioned, one of the last issues of Scientific American had a key central piece called The Last Stand of Dark Matter, Dark Energy. Essentially, the scientific community is realizing and acknowledging the fact that the old model, at the center of which there is this dark matter, dark energy, purely hypothetical concepts comprising up to 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe, but cannot be detected now for 20 years. So the scientific community is realizing that the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics has reached a dead end, and we have to expand, we have to move for the next step. And in fact, the next step, which now there's already an initial empirical validation for, the new God's physics paradigm, which includes relativity theory and quantum mechanics as special cases within this broader theoretical new understanding. And I mentioned in previous presentations that there's already an initial validation for this new God's physics or computational field theory paradigm, just as 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, or almost precisely 100 years ago in 1919, when Eddington verified one of the critical predictions of relativity theory, general relativity theory, So when Eddington verified one of the critical predictions of general relativity theory, which was the double-valued perihelion curvature of Mercury's pathway around the Sun, predicted uniquely by relativity theory, which was different than the prediction of the previous paradigm, the 19th century paradigm, Newtonian mechanics, regarding the value of Mercury's curvature around the Sun, which was half the value of what Einstein predicted. So the minute that Eddington verified that in the famous expedition of 1919 solar eclipse, the minute that he verified that in fact Einstein's general relativity theory prediction was correct, general relativity theory was accepted overnight as the new paradigm, new satisfactory paradigm of 20th century physics, and it did include Newtonian mechanics as a special case. And in much the same manner, now there's been two initial validations, empirical validations of two critical predictions, unique critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm, or the computational field theory paradigm. One of them had to do with the non-continuous accelerated expansion of the universe. I spoke about it, but essentially the fact that there is a gap between the early universe measurements of the rate of the universe's expansion, what's called the background radiation, which is significantly smaller than the current astronomical measurement of the universe's accelerated rate of expansion. That cannot be explained by the old model of relativity theory or quantum mechanics, the old material causal paradigm, but it is predicted by God's physics' unique prediction, which essentially talks about a non-continuous increase or increases in the rate of the universe's expansion rate every Jewish Rosh Hashanah, or every time you have a collective human consciousness focus of millions of individuals focusing on this singular higher ordered universal conscious reality, i.e. God in religious terms. Every time you have a collective human consciousness focus, the new God's physics paradigm is telling us that there would be a non-continuous jump in the rate of the universe's expansion rate, or accelerated expansion rate. And so far, and I've called obviously cosmologists, astronomers to test, even in the last Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year of September 7th and 8th of 2021, I called cosmologists, astronomers to test specifically during those 2 days and subsequently that there will be a predicted non-continuous leap or increase in the universe's accelerated rate of expansion. I'm still waiting for results to come in, but nevertheless, the fact that the critical prediction of God's physics new paradigm is that the universe has a non-continuous leaps and changes in the rate of its expansion, that is already verified by the gap. I published about that as well in one of those 60 peer-reviewed scientific articles, but that is validated or confirmed by the existent gap or unexplained gap between the early universe cosmological background radiation rate of the universe's expansion rate and the current astronomical higher universe's accelerated expansion. And that signifies a non-continuous change in the universe's expansion, which is exactly what the God's physics new paradigm signifies. And obviously, to the extent that cosmologists, astronomers will actually verify the more specific prediction about Rosh Hashanah change, that would validate it even further. But that in and of itself, the fact that there is a non-continuous change in the universe's rate of expansion from the early measurements to the contemporary measurements is already a validation, an initial validation of God's physics, one of the two or three critical predictions of God's physics new paradigm. The other validation which I spoke about is the proton radius puzzle, without going into details, too many details, based on the new God's physics paradigm explanation that a more massive particle is computed by the singular higher ordered universal consciousness or computational principle UCP as appearing more spatially consistent across a series of universal frames. Remember, the new God's physics paradigm essentially discovered a major breakthrough in science, that there exists a higher ordered singular universal computational / consciousness principle UCP, which simultaneously computes all the pixels, all the points in the universe simultaneously at an unfathomable rate of 1.36 in the power of minus 50. That's c squared divided by Planck's constant, meaning many trillions of times per second. There are frames, it's like a cinema film in a sense, somewhat similar, cinematic film metaphor, that this UCP is producing a extremely rapid series of frames. Each frame comprises the whole universe, three-dimensional picture or frame of the whole universe simultaneously, and then between one frame and another, the whole universe dissolves back into this UCP, and it happens again and again. So essentially, this new God's physics paradigm is saying that when the UCP computes simultaneously every spatial pixel in the universe, it computes for it the four basic physical features of space, energy, mass, and time, based on 2 or 3 computational dimensions, which we spoke about. But essentially, it's saying that, for example, when it computes the mass of a particle, the mass of the particle is given by the UCP's computation of how many times that object has been presented spatially consistent, meaning that more massive particles would be presented more spatially consistent and across more frames than less massive particles. And that's exactly what's been observed, even though, albeit, it cannot be explained by the old material causal paradigm, which is the fact that the more massive hydrogen replaced muon atom. In other words, the electron in the hydrogen was replaced by a muon, and that hydrogen, muon hydrogen, relative to the standard electron hydrogen, in the case of the muon hydrogen, the radius of the proton decreases because of a more spatially consistent presentations of the muon, which affects the proton. So that's been explained or predicted as a unique critical prediction by God's physics new paradigm. And that cannot be explained by the old material causal paradigm. That's why it's called the proton radius puzzle. And now from 2010, many different attempts to replicate, to explain that unexplained phenomena for the old material causal paradigm have failed. And so it's a riddle, it's a puzzle, the proton radius puzzle for the old material causal paradigm, but it's a complete or a precise verification of a critical prediction of the new God's physics paradigm. So we stand at a point. I'm just summarizing some of the things that I've been presented, and also that appear in this fascinating God's physics book by iUniverse.com. So essentially what I'm saying is that we've reached a point now that the scientific community is accepting increasingly the new God's physics or computational unified field theory paradigm of 21st century physics. And once these two critical predictions, even one critical prediction, would have sufficed to accept this new paradigm, just as Eddington's one critical prediction verification of Einstein's critical prediction about Mercury's perihelion around the sun, double-valued perihelion curvature around the sun, that was sufficient for the world to accept relativity theory, general relativity theory, as the new satisfactory scientific paradigm for the 20th century physics. And in the same manner, the verification now of two critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm is sufficient to accept the new God's physics paradigm as the new satisfactory scientific paradigm for 21st century physics and science more generally. And it does embed within what I mentioned, the universal computational formula. At the heart of this new God's physics paradigm, there's a universal computational formula. It appears, by the way, at the bottom of this fascinating book. This universal computational formula unifies for the first time space, time, energy, and mass, which have not been unified by general relativity theory, not completely unified. So it's the first time that it does unify all the forces, all the four basic physical features of space, energy, time, and mass, the four basic physical forces of nature, and it does many other things. And so for the first time now, God's physics, which unifies all of these forces, is accepted as the new scientific paradigm for 21st century. And now I can get more into the specific topic of today's presentation, which is essentially talking about miracles can happen. And so, and it's related obviously to Hanukkah celebration, in which a great miracle happened to the Jewish people. But it does signify more generally the fact that this new God's physics paradigm for the first time allows for miracles to happen as part of the scientific acceptable paradigm. And so I think we have to start one step backwards, or take one step back about the major difference between the new God's physics causal computation paradigm and the old 20th century material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And as the name signifies, the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics essentially says that assumes that everything in the universe occurs as a result of direct physical interactions between elements, relativistic elements, such as the curvature of space-time by massive objects. That's what general relativity theory is telling us. And associated with this, the assumption that the universe was created by an initial nuclear event, the Big Bang model, and both are negated and challenged by this new God's physics paradigm due to the simultaneity of the UCP's computation of every spatial pixel in the universe. And the key difference between the old material causal paradigm, which assumed whether in the relativistic realm, such as general relativity, Einstein's equations, what I mentioned, and the Big Bang model, whether in the microscopic scale of quantum mechanics, that's also based on a material causal assumption, wherein direct physical interaction between a subatomical probe and a subatomic target's assumed probability wave function caused the collapse of that probability wave function to a single complementary space, energy, time, mass value. That's also cause and effect, as if the direct physical interaction of the probe and the assumed target's probability wave function causes the collapse of this assumed target's probability wave function into a single complementary space, energy, time, mass value. So those two models of relativity theory for the macroscopic scale and quantum mechanics for the microscopic scale, they're based on the same basic material causal assumption, assuming that there's direct physical interaction, whether it's between massive objects and their curvature of space-time, or the Big Bang event that caused the creation of the universe supposedly, or whether it's in the microscopic scale, the direct physical interaction of the probe and target subatomic elements causing the collapse of the target's assumed probability wave function. So that old model is assuming material causality, direct or indirect physical interaction between certain physical elements, which causes a certain cascade of events or a certain phenomenon to take place. And that's negated by God's physics' new paradigm, which essentially says you cannot have cause and effect in that manner. And the reason being because the UCP computes simultaneously every spatial pixel in the universe. There cannot be any direct material interaction or causal interaction between any two or more spatial pixels in the universe. That negated the Big Bang model. It essentially replaces that idea that the universe was created by an initial Big Bang nuclear event with the realization that the universe is being created, dissolved, recreated, and evolved many trillions of times per second, and it's only due to the activity of this UCP. The universe, in fact, when it is dissolved between frames, universal frames, and then it's recreated, it's not the same material element that was in the previous frame that passed to the new frame. It's all, you may say, in the memory or in the consciousness of this universal conscious reality, which is producing, dissolving, reproducing, and evolving the universe. And so the starting point for understanding how miracles can happen and how our whole conception of the universe changes is that we understand that the universe does not exist as a static, material, constant existence or solid physical reality. And in fact, I mentioned that in the previous presentations. In fact, one of the two profound postulates of this new God's physics paradigm is what I call the computational invariance principle and the universal conscious reality, which essentially tells us, without going into details, that since the only thing that remains constant and uniform and continuous in the universe is this universal consciousness reality, or UCP, it computes all the universe, all the spatial pixels in the universe simultaneously for every given frame, and for each of these spatial pixels, the four basic physical features of space, energy, time, and mass. So the UCP, or the universal conscious reality, exists both during its creation and sustenance of any frame, universal frame, and it also exists in between the frames. So when you have one frame and then another frame, in between them, the universe dissolves back into this UCP, or universal conscious reality, and so the universe doesn't exist as a solid reality. It is essentially just a manifestation, a transient, temporary manifestation of this universal conscious reality, and we start looking at the universe in a different way. The universe is not a material, solid entity. It doesn't exist all the time. It exists for a tiny, brief period of time, and even when it exists, it's only computed and created. It's only manifestation of this universal conscious reality. It doesn't exist in and of itself, and then it dissolves back into the universal conscious reality, and then it's recreated. So the only thing that really remains constant is the universal conscious reality, and that universal conscious reality is manifesting, or is in a sense clothing itself, is manifesting as the physical universe for a short period of time, and it exists without the physical universe in between the frames. So there's only one reality, which is this universal conscious reality. And this universal conscious reality is what's driving, creating the universe, dissolving it, sustaining it, evolving it. That's what's driving the universe forward and evolving the universe, and we'll speak about it in a second. It's evolving the universe from inanimate matter through animate plants, animals, human beings, and towards the ultimate goal of this universal conscious reality, to drive the universe towards the perfected Geula state. Perfected Geula state, we spoke about it and I wrote about it in the book, is a state of perfection morally, spiritually, and even physically, in which the whole of humanity and the whole world, the whole universe, would recognize, especially humanity and especially science, would recognize the singularity of this universal conscious reality, which is the sole reality that exists. And the universe is only a transient, temporary, or transient phenomenal manifestation of this singular universal conscious reality, which is the only reality in the universe and beyond the universe. So we're transitioning from the old material causal paradigm to the new acausal computation, God's physics paradigm. Acausal computation, because it's all dependent on the works and computation and functioning of this universal consciousness reality. And so we start realizing that the universe doesn't operate by cause and effect. It wasn't created by an initial Big Bang nuclear event, because there couldn't have been any mass, energy, etc. that would pass from the first frame to the second frame. There's no cause and effect. And even within the first frame, there couldn't have been really a material causal interaction. The universe is really a manifestation, an evolution of this universal conscious reality, manifesting every time a bigger frame and a more evolved frame, and also the forms of consciousness are evolving from, as I said, inanimate matter to animate plants, animals, human beings, and the Geula perfected state. That's the real nature of the universe, is this universal conscious reality, and the real evolution of the universe, sustenance, evolution of the universe, is based on this universal conscious reality, singular aim and goal to evolve the universe towards its perfected Geula state. I mentioned also, and we'll get now a little bit more into details about understanding that if we realize that the universe does not evolve and does not exist and was not created by material causal entities or interactions, one of those 60 peer-reviewed articles title was Explaining the Universe from Without, because we're so habituated to thinking that the world exists by material cause and effect, which is within the universe. That's, by the way, why the material causal old paradigm is trying to cling and to explain the expansion of the universe by looking at missing 95% mass and energy which cannot be detected. Those are missings, and really not existent. So the old material causal paradigm is looking to explain the universe from within the universe by material causal interaction. And the new acausal computation God's physics paradigm is telling us no, the way to explain the universe and its evolution is solely by looking at the UCP, or universal conscious reality, that's evolving the universe from without. And this is why we have to focus on this universal conscious reality and its intrinsic characteristics to understand how the universe is operating and how it's evolved. And so recently there was a discovery of really an expansion of this universal consciousness formula, universal computational formula, which I mentioned, that unifies space, time, energy, and mass, and the four forces, etc. There was an expansion, a discovery of a more expansive form or format of this universal computational formula, which I called the 10 hierarchical computational dimensions universal consciousness formula. Essentially, it's looking now at the characteristics, the intrinsic propensities and characteristics of this universal conscious reality, which is the only way that we can explain how the universe is existing, is being created, dissolved, recreated, and evolved many trillions of times per second, and how it's evolving. Those can only be explained by looking and examining this universal conscious reality, 10 hierarchical computational dimensions. And within those, I would mention now two. One is something I spoke about in the past, which is the moral dynamic equilibrium principle, essentially telling us that because this singular higher order universal conscious reality is typified by oneness, by morality, by goodness, all goodness, by an aim or a goal, ultimate goal of this perfected Geula state, but because it's all oneness, it also possesses this moral principle, dynamic equilibrium moral principle, essentially telling us that as part of this universal conscious reality aim to evolve the universe from material, from inanimate matter through animate plants, animals, human beings, and especially humanity towards that perfected Geula state, in which human beings, possessing the only free choice, expansive form of consciousness, human beings can make and are making every moment moral choices. So the moral choices and the moral principle of this universal conscious reality essentially becomes key. It tells us that because this universal conscious reality is unitary and it's typified by peace, harmony, morality, so it has this dynamic equilibrium moral principle, which essentially tells us that every time that a human being acts in a moral or immoral manner towards another human being, that instigates, by this universal conscious reality, a selection of one of multiple possible futures for that individual human being. So when a human being bestows goodness in another human being, that instigates or brings about the selection by the universal consciousness reality, or UCP, of an equivalent gratifying future, one of multiple possible futures for that individual human being which executed or chose a good moral choice. And then they're getting the echo or a corresponding good future, which is equivalent to what they've bestowed goodness or happiness upon another human being. They will receive the same. And that's really as a way of encouraging humanity and teaching humanity that we're all one. And vice versa, by the way, if a person, God forbid, inflicts pain or suffering on another human being, that would instigate the UCP or universal conscious reality, creating a situation that human being that inflicted pain or suffering, God forbid, would have to experience somewhat similar, not as a punishment, but as a means of teaching us individually and collectively that we're all one, we're all part of this universal conscious reality. And I give them just a simile, saying, in the same way that a healthy, mentally balanced human being would not use their right hand to inflict pain, God forbid, on their left hand, because they realize it's part of the same human being, it's part of me. Same way, in a sense, the universal conscious reality has this dynamic equilibrium moral principle, which teaches us that if I inflict pain, God forbid, on another human being, I would have to experience pain. And then I start connecting the dots and saying, we're both connected. We're really both part of this universal conscious reality. So that was one of the 10 hierarchical computational dimensions, which typifies this universal conscious reality. And another one, which I didn't speak about yet, is here is the free choice of this universal conscious reality. And we have to realize that very different than what we've been thinking, accustomed to think. I mentioned the fact that Einstein said common sense is only that which is common to the senses. And his greatness, his genius, had to do with thinking outside the box, just as a child would think. Questioning things, it's not accepting basic assumptions or norms of thinking as gold. They're not. He was able to question, and that's what we're now encouraged to do with this new God's physics paradigm. So essentially, different from the old paradigm where we thought that it's all cause and effect, material causality. In this new paradigm, we're starting to think that especially the free choice, the universal conscious reality free choice, the universal conscious reality, or in religious terms we would call it God, has complete free choice. It's creating the universe every time, many trillions of times per second, and it's creating anew the universe. And there's no cause and effect within any frame. There's no cause and effect between frames, because the whole universe dissolves back into this universal conscious reality. And so this free choice of the universal conscious reality, this is the first of the 10 hierarchical computational dimensions, through which the universal conscious reality is creating all the time every consecutive future. Then it becomes the present universal frame of the universe. There's free choice for this universal conscious reality. It's not bound by any natural laws. It's not bound by what has happened. It is typified by these 10 hierarchical computational dimensions, and it is typified therefore by morality, by driving the universe towards its perfected Geula state. But it's not bound by any material causal laws. And that also means that all the material causal laws, let's say the relativistic laws, the quantum laws, or equations or relationships, they're now metamorphosized. We now start looking, and it's a beautiful development, very elegant and beautiful development of theoretical physics, 21st century theoretical physics, because just as relativity theory included quantum mechanics included Newtonian mechanics as a special case, the new God's physics paradigm includes elements of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and does replicate all the phenomena of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, but it's explained in a different way. There's no necessity for the relativistic laws to operate. It's not that massive objects are curving space and time. There's an alternative explanation about the way that the UCP computes massive objects relative to less massive objects, which gives us the illusion or the perception of the curvature of space-time by massive object. And really, when we want to look at the evolution of the universe and how the universe evolves, it's not by cause and effect, material causality. It's driven by, if I would have to simplify it, I would say it's driven by, according to God's physics new paradigm, by first and foremost the ultimate Geula goal of the universe. And I said the same way that an architect would plan a palace to its minutest details before the builders start building the palace. The same way this universal conscious reality, we have one of the postulates, which is called the reverse time Geula goal postulate. The universal conscious reality has in mind, so to speak, or has pre-planned the whole evolution of the universe from its inanimate matter, animate plants, animals, and human beings, towards reaching the universe towards the Geula state. In a sense, the whole universe has been pre-planned, pre-programmed, and is being computed and evolved towards that perfected state. I gave a metaphor. It would be a little bit like the Waze software. When a person has a goal of bringing their car to a certain destination, then even if they make a mistake, the Waze software would correct them, recomputing their traveling pathway to reach that destination. And in a sense, the universal conscious reality is planning and correcting and recomputing the universe based on our moral choices towards, for each individual human being and for the whole of humanity, to bring humanity and each one of us individually towards that perfected Geula state. And what that means is that, in a sense, so we're focusing on the fact that there's free choice for this universal conscious reality. It's not bound by material causal laws. It's actually driving the universe towards that perfected Geula state. That brings us to the notion of miracles, because miracles are instances in which what we are accustomed to think of as natural laws of cause and effect, those are changed. And the interesting thing, I wrote about it in this Miracles Can Happen article, and I'm just sharing a little bit of that in this talk. I believe that this Miracles Can Happen actually was published also, or appears also in this God's Physics iUniverse.com book, worthwhile reading. But essentially, the Miracles Can Happen notion is that, first of all, the very fact that we have those laws, relativistic and quantum laws, which are now explained in a different manner or viewed from a different higher perspective, those laws are really not a necessity. Those laws are a manifestation of the free will of the universal conscious reality. In other words, if we take it to an extreme, the fact that I have a cup of water that I'm drinking from, that cup of water exists in one frame, and then the fact that that cup of water would appear in the subsequent frame is due to the free will, really, of the universal conscious reality. But this universal conscious reality has also a manifestation of certain ways of computing the universe, which gives us the constancy of the cup. It wouldn't disappear, even though it can disappear if the universal conscious reality opts to retract it, which it does in between frames. The cup would disappear. But naturally or regularly, this universal conscious reality evolves the universe through the regular computation patterns, which gives us the appearance of relativistic and quantum laws. Really, the real understanding is higher through this universal consciousness, 10 hierarchical computational dimensions, universal consciousness formula. But we're getting to the point where we're understanding that, first of all, the very fact that the universe exists in an orderly and predictable manner in and of itself is sort of a miracle, because the universal conscious reality is choosing through its free will to create the universe in an orderly manner, to compute the mass, energy, space and time in an orderly manner, in a consistent manner, but it's still retaining the free choice element of this universal conscious reality. And so the gist and the apex of this new realization, which is quite amazing and it's very relevant for Hanukkah, is that really the universal conscious reality has free will, and it, in a natural way, in a regular way, it creates the universe through an orderly computation of this universal computational formula, and through those 10 hierarchical computational dimensions. And in a sense, even though it seems to us to operate in a mechanical manner, it's really a miracle. It's really creating the universe, evolving the universe. The very fact that it's creating the universe anew in the same manner or very similar to the frame that was before it, that very fact is, in a sense, stemming from the all goodness property of the universal conscious reality, because it's not necessitated, it's not necessary, it's not determined or bound by any material causal laws. And so the fact that the universe is evolving in an orderly manner, and life as we know it is predictable, our car will be in the same place that we left it, our beard would have the same dark or white hair as we saw it yesterday, maybe another white hair, another dark hair. But the fact that the universe allows, or the universal conscious reality allows for the universe to evolve in a predictable and consistent manner, in and of itself is a miracle. And it obviously opens the door, just as this hypothesis, which I called for astronomers, cosmologists to test, about the non-continuous accelerated expansion of the universe during collective human consciousness focus, such as the Jewish Rosh Hashanah. And we said there's an initial already validation through the gap between the early stage universe background radiation cosmological measurement and the contemporary astronomical measurement, which is higher for the accelerated of the universe expansion. But that non-continuous expansion of the universe during Rosh Hashanah, which still needs to be verified, or during collective human consciousness focus, that's also an indication that this universal conscious reality has this free will, and when it senses, or when it's being focused upon by a collective human consciousness focus, it instigates the free will of this universal conscious reality to make a leap out of all goodness property, to make a leap and to expand the universe to a much broader, much closer universe to this Geula perfected state. That's already a glimpse of the fact that the free will of the universal conscious reality can change the universe and is in fact regenerate the universe out of its goodwill every split second, every trillionth of a second. And even the fact that it's creating the universe in an orderly manner in what seems to us as strict relativistic and quantum laws, that's also a miracle in and of itself, because it's not necessary, it's not necessitated by any material causal laws. Now, in a more practical manner, and how it's connected to Hanukkah, we celebrate a miracle for the Jewish people. By the way, in the New God's Physics paradigm, there's a parallel to Hasidic thought, which is called personal providence. In Hasidic thought, we know that God is creating the universe not out of chance, not out of any necessity. It's actually watching over every human being. It's actually caring for every human being, and even for plants and animals, etc. There's a story about the Baal Shem Tov, one of the great Jewish sages, who was walking in the forest, and he saw, and he was trying to explain to his followers, Hasidic followers, this concept of personal providence. And he wanted to explain to them that everything in the universe does not happen by chance. It's all being seen, overseen, cared for by God, by this universal conscious reality in scientific terms, and it's called personal providence. And when he was asked by one of his followers, how could that be? How could the God watch over every tiny element in the universe? And he then demonstrated this, and he said, do you see this tossing leaf in the air? It was twisting and hurling and churning down, and it was then falling on the grass. And he said, he asked one of his followers to flip it over, or to raise it, to lift it, and underneath it they found a worm that was almost dry. It was still alive, but it was almost dry. It was in jeopardy. And he said, you see that the whole, even the winds and the twisting and churning of this leaf in the air, and it's falling on this worm, is really by personal providence. In other words, God in this case intended for that leaf to protect that worm so it would not die. And so this is just this was an illustration from Hasidic thought about personal providence, but we find now in God's Physics New Paradigm great parallels. And in fact, one of the books, one of the chapters in the book, talks about the convergence of this new God's Physics paradigm with Hasidic thought, which is worthwhile looking at. But the idea is that in practical terms, and now for Hanukkah celebration, we start understanding that nothing in the universe happens by chance. That this universal conscious reality cares very much about human beings, about our moral choices, about our goodness, about our realization that we're all tied and we're all connected, that we're not separate from each other, we're not separate from this universal conscious reality. And therefore, miracles can happen and do happen. Even the fact that we are remaining in the same manner that we were yesterday, when we start realizing that our bodies and all of the trillions of cells in our bodies are being memorized and reproduced and evolved and cared for to remain healthy and to be reproduced and evolved, that in and of itself seems like a natural law, but really it's a miracle, because this universal conscious reality has to remember and evolve and sustain and evolve every small cell in our bodies, etc. And the same thing for everything happening in our lives, that everything is in a sense watched over and guided and protected and guided by this universal conscious reality towards the perfected Geula state. So it gives us great hope. Miracles can happen is really an understanding that everything in the universe happens not by chance. The great Einstein himself, when he wasn't satisfied with the contradiction between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and specifically about quantum mechanics, one of his famous sayings was that God doesn't play with dice. He felt that everything in the universe has to be, in a sense, governed by this higher reality, which is what this new God's physics paradigm is discovering. So I think that we're reaching the end of this interesting talk. God's physics celebration, Hanukkah celebration, miracles can happen, and it opens our eyes in a sense, just as the Lubavitcher Rebbe is encouraging us in a sense to open our eyes and to see the real reality behind the universe, which is this universal conscious reality, or in religious terms, God. So we're starting to open our eyes, and science is starting to open its eyes through this new God's physics paradigm to understand that everything in the universe is being watched over, that it's a moral universe, or guided by the moral principle of the real underlying reality, the sole reality behind the universe, that the universe is being guided towards its perfected Geula state. And so we start opening our eyes, understanding that we are watched over, that there is only one reality, which is this universal conscious reality, and that it cares about our moral choices, and that it cares about our existence, our well-being. Even when it corrects some of our wrongdoings, it's really aimed towards teaching us to become better human beings and to become a part of this Geula perfected state, which in a sense, and truly, the discovery of this God's physics new paradigm is bringing humanity towards that perfected state. So I'm very glad to present this talk about God's physics celebration of Hanukkah. Miracles can happen. Happy Hanukkah.